Nobody believes we can do it. Reporters, opponents, except ourselves. Henry Gerber, an early gay rights activist starting in the 1920s, reflected on the founding of the nation's first gay organization, Society for Human Rights, and its first gay publication. Arrested 3 times in Chicago for, quote, moral turpitude, his relentless leadership in the 1920s until his death in 1992 left a legacy for others to follow in the fight for gay and lesbian rights. The sale and distribution of obscene materials has been prohibited in most American states since the early 19th century and by federal law since 1873. Adoption of obscenity laws in the United States at a federal level in 1873 was largely due to the efforts of Anthony Comstock's intense lobbying, leading to the passage of an anti-obscenity statute known as the Comstock Act. This act made it a crime to distribute obscene material through the post office. However, the legislation did not define obscenity and left it to the states and courts to determine what was and what wasn't considered obscene. Especially apparent in 1953, President Eisenhower issued Executive Order 10450, which banned gays and lesbians from working for the government. Hundreds of agents were assigned to investigate the private lives of federal employees. The state of Illinois had its own public indecency laws, known as Section 11-9, as well as laws at the municipal level. The laws in Chicago that restricted homosexuality were Chicago's anti-decency laws. As late as the 1950s, they provided public with very conservative laws dealing with sexually explicit motion pictures, magazines, and mail-order publications. Similarly, the city of Chicago had no place that welcomed lesbians, and it was against the law to open a place dedicated to gays or lesbians. By the 1950s, controversies over homosexuals were spreading throughout the city like wildfires. Homosexuality, to many people, was a sin and should stay illegal. Gerber's newsletter, Friendship and Freedom, in 1924, which was distributed to its small membership in Chicago and other parts of the country, had an impact on a new group of leaders and activists in the 1950s. The denial of equality for the gay community in Chicago did not go unnoticed. Gerber's leadership and legacy moved these leaders to challenge the anti-decency laws. In the 1950s and 60s, men began protesting for their rights, and the first lesbian support groups were founded. Groups such as the Daughter of Bilities and the Mattachine Society were created. The Daughter of Bilities becomes the first lesbian rights organization in the United States. The organization hosts social functions providing alternatives to lesbian bars and clubs, which are frequently raided by police. Local chapters of both groups existed in Chicago by 1955. The goal of these organizations was to secure social acceptance and understanding of lesbians and gay men through their educational efforts. However, in 1964, several gay men and lesbians reconstituted the organization as a more politically active group in response to escalating police harassment at gay bars. It began to monitor police harassment of gay bars and published a politically conscious newsletter called the Mattachine Review. Despite homosexuality being a punishable offense in Chicago, gay bars operated secretly, and some individuals established places where they could hang out in secrecy, even with the risk of the police finding out, further challenging the laws. The first secret lesbian bar in the nation was founded in Chicago in 1965. Lost and Found was located on Irving Park in Albany, in Chicago, and was originally founded by Ava Allen and Shirley Christensen. Ava Allen and her Lost and Found bar have been vital parts of Chicago's lesbian community since the club opened in 1965. In the 1960s and 70s, Allen and her partner resisted police harassment as well as enforcement of an ordinance that prohibited women and men from dressing in clothes that supposedly belonged to the opposite sex. Allen's bar had served as a starting point for generations of Chicago's lesbians and the oldest lesbian bar in the city. Just like Gerber, Allen and Christensen defied the law to open their bar. Well aware of what might happen to them if they were sought out, they risked their reputations for a place where lesbians could peacefully hang out together and drink. Recalls Linda Barron, "In the beginning there was a legally enforced dress code every bar owner had to follow, or get closed down or go to jail if caught. Some women would show up to the Lost and Found dressed inappropriately. Their pants would not have zippers in the front. Two women dancing cheek to cheek wasn't allowed either, nor hugging. A lot of times the cops would sneak into the bars in pretext of being a safe customer just to catch them doing that, then stand up and state, "This is a raid," close the place, and take the people to jail for indecencies. Through the years, the Lost and Found had a following of dedicated people, now fondly called the old-timers. They were protective of the bar too. They didn't allow rowdy behavior from anyone. This was their home and nobody was going to ruin it for them. They had their standards, and if you wanted to come back, you had to respect them. That loyalty lives on in their personal lives today. Inspired by secret organizations sprouting in Chicago, people began to stand up for their rights, began to openly challenge the anti-decency laws. In spite of the harsh and unaccepting city laws, people decided that they would rather risk their own reputations and social lives than accept the restrictions of the Lost and Found, and the leadership of Ava Allen, Shirley Christensen, and Henry Gerber inspired many other future supporters to go against the law to establish more rights for the gay community. While the passage of city and state gay rights legislation was years away, Chicago did see some important changes in the 1970s. In 1970, the first Gay Pride Parade was established in Chicago. The American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from its categories of illness in 1973. In that same year, Pearl Hart and Renee Hanover successfully challenged the city's law against cross-dressing. Until that point, you could be arrested if you were not wearing at least 3 items of clothing considered appropriate for your gender. The first Gay Community Center was announced in 1971 and was advertised in the Chicago Gay Alliance newsletter. The Chicago Alliance newsletter was very active and vocal in the 1970s, with sharing gay activities and updates. Authors always shared their purpose and what they wanted to seek and accomplish for the community. Stargaze opened in 1998, a successful lesbian bar as well, and the Chicago Gay Alliance helped it open a shelter home for the LGBT groups. The October 14, 1979 National March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights. An estimated 100,000 people attended that first of several similar Washington, D.C.-based national marches. Chicagoans who drove, took the train, or flew to D.C. for the weekend's event came back forever changed. That renewed energy was needed because the movement was about to face a new and terrifying opponent: AIDS. Today there are still groups who oppose gay rights. However, without the initial movements and actions, this would never have been what it is today, or maybe even ever possible. Since they had the courage to speak up, even with the chance of getting caught, they still went through with it. Their strong leadership led Chicago and even the whole United States to what it is today in terms of equal rights.